Good morning, everybody. Welcome to your 12th general surgery lecture. On today, we'll be discussing hemorrhage, its diagnosis, and management. As you all know, hemorrhage is defined as leakage of blood from the blood vessels, usually because of a cut or a tear in the blood vessel secondary to trauma. There are multiple ways of classifying hemorrhage. It can be classified based on the source of the blood that is hemorrhaging. Then it would be arterial hemorrhage, venous hemorrhage, or capillary hemorrhage. Then, based on the timing of the hemorrhage after the injury, it would be primary hemorrhage if it is the hemorrhage taking place immediately after the cut or the laceration or the crush injury. Reactionary hemorrhage occurs within 24 hours of the surgery. Initially, the bleeding had stopped. Usually, it is because the blood pressure of the patient had fallen after the hemorrhage because of hypovolemia and because of your pressure dressing. There had been clot formation and temporarily that had stopped the bleeding. Now that you have resuscitated the patient, infused crystalloids or colloids, the blood pressure has come up, and this raised systolic pressure can then dislodge the clot and bleeding can start. Similarly, loosely applied ligature, which may have sufficed with the low blood pressure, can slip once the blood pressure comes back up, and reactionary hemorrhage then takes place within 24 hours of the injury or the surgery. Uh, Secondary hemorrhage occurs between 5 to 14 days after the injury or surgery and usually occurs between 5th to 7th day after surgery. And in majority of the cases, the cause is infection. Uh, Wound infection leads to infection necrosis of the tissue and erodes the blood vessels, and they may start bleeding. Then the presence of your tight dressing or the drain that you have, plastic or rubber drain that you have placed in, it may be impinging on a blood vessel, and over days it can necrose that wall of the blood vessel and lead to bleeding. Third cause in second leading to secondary hemorrhage would be a tumor or a malignancy, which is eroding the blood vessel, remnants of the tumor after your surgery, eroding a blood vessel and causing hemorrhage. And then, depending on the visibility of the hemorrhage, it can be either revealed hemorrhage, which is called external hemorrhage, or it can be concealed hemorrhage, which is called internal hemorrhage. Similarly, a hemorrhage can be classified based on the etiological nature of the hemorrhage. Surgical hemorrhage is the direct result of trauma or injury. It can be a incision or a stab or a laceration or crush injury. And usually, this hemorrhage is controllable by surgical techniques, which we will discuss in detail today. Non-surgical hemorrhage, the cause is a coagulation disorder. This coagulation disorder may be a primary disorder which the patient had previously, like hemophilia or Christmas disease, and any factor 9 deficiency. Uh, uh, but it can also be because secondary to massive surgical hemorrhage, where the body has spent all its clotting factors, and now the speed of production of clotting factors is less than what is being consumed, and therefore the clotting ability of blood is compromised. So, coagulopathy can be primary or secondary to massive surgical hemorrhage. Once a patient has developed non-surgical hemorrhage or a coagulopathy, then this is not controllable by surgical techniques alone. You have to control and compensate for the uh, coagulation disorder. Adults usually have 65 to 75 ml per kilogram body weight or blood in their body, and in infants there is 80 to 85 milliliters per kilogram body weight of blood in their body. Therefore, an average 70 kilograms adult would have anything from 4.5 liters to 5.2 liters whole blood circulating at any time in their body. This is generally rounded off to 5 liters in general calculations. Then, how do you estimate the amount of blood loss that has taken place after an injury or coagulopathy? If you encounter a blood clot, whether it is a large wound like in bomb blast or gunshot wounds in the wound, and that clot, or you can see this in internal hemorrhages, intraperitoneal hemorrhage, liver lacerations, ruptured spleen, ruptured ectopic pregnancy, and you come across a clot which is the size of a fist, closed fist, then that is considered equal to 500 ml. Similarly, you can weigh these swabs, the dry sponges that you have been using to wipe the wound or the abdominal cavity clean, and 1 gram addition of weight to the swab, dry swab weight means 1 ml of blood loss. Uh, then a fall of hemoglobin is a guide. Somebody who had a hemoglobin to start with 12, 13, 14, and now is at 10. You can imagine that he has had several units of blood loss because of this massive decrease in hemoglobin. Then, in case of concealed hemorrhages like fractures of the femur, tibia, or fractures of the pelvis, they can be huge blood loss inside the body with only mild apparent swelling outside, and that can be very deceiving. For example, femur fracture of a femoral shaft can lead to anything from 500 ml or 1 unit of blood to 4 units of blood, 2000 ml, 2 liters. And similarly, tibial fractures can bleed inside. On the outside, it just appears as if the leg has swollen, and it can be anything from 500 ml to 1.5 liters of blood around the fracture site. In case of pelvis, it is even more dangerous. Retroperitoneally and extraperitoneally, the pelvis can even bleed intraperitoneally if there is peritoneal tear, and anything from 3 to 6 units, 1.5 liter to 3 liters of blood may be lost. So, in such cases, the general policy in any trauma center would be to immediately take blood for grouping and cross match. And even if the patient is stable at the moment, vitally, you immediately ask for 3 to 6 units of blood to be arranged, because this patient is going to need these transfusions overnight for resuscitation. Now, what is the physiological response of the body to hemorrhage? The first response on from any blood vessel that is cut, that is leaking blood, is that it tries to constrict. Usually in vessels smaller than 1 mm, it can even stop the bleeding. The aperture or the cut point in the vessel vasoconstricts, and then platelet plugs it, and bleeding can stop. However, in larger vessels, although it does decrease the amount of the rate of blood loss, but it is usually insufficient to stop the bleeding altogether. Then tachycardia or increased heart rate. This is one sign that any doctor must look for through at repeated checkups of an admitted trauma patient for primary survey, secondary survey, and tertiary survey. Why? Because we know that cardiac output is heart rate multiplied by stroke volume. Stroke volume depends on the venous return coming back to the heart. If patient is hypovolemic, the venous return falls, and the filling of the heart is less, and the pumping blood being pumped out per stroke is decreased. To maintain homeostasis, to maintain the cardiac output, when the stroke volume falls, the body raises the heart rate and the number of times the heart beats to maintain a steady cardiac output. Therefore, raised heart rate on the one side, it would be a sign of a natural anxiety after any injury, but a rising heart rate in an admitted patient, once the patient comes to the ER and you are stabilizing the patient, a rising heart means ongoing blood loss. Therefore, the first sign that you look for in a trauma patient is a rising heart rate. Tachypnea, hemoglobin is also being lost in the blood, so oxygen carrying capacity of blood is decreasing, and the patient has to breathe faster to transfer that amount of oxygen which is required. Then fall in renal blood flow is another natural response, physiological response of the body. Vasoconstriction leads to low glomerular filtration rate, which results in low urine output. At the same time, after injury, aldosterone is being released and anti-diuretic hormone is being released, and all these combine to, on the one hand, constrict the renal blood flow, and at the same time they try to retain sodium and water in the body. Therefore, low urine output is also, or a falling urine output in an admitted patient is also a sign of ongoing internal hemorrhage or inadequate compensatory treatment that you are giving. So low urine output has to be, usually all major trauma patients are catheterized and their hourly urine output is measured. And if the urine output is below adequate or acceptable levels, that means the patient is still losing blood despite your IV fluids or trying to replace the volume, attempts to replace the volume. Then ongoing hypotension, hypoxia, metabolic acidosis will ultimately lead to cardiac depression. And now you have a heart which initially had increased the heart rate to compensate for the decreased stroke volume, and now you will start getting bradycardia because now the cardiac myocardium is getting depressed because of the hypoxia and the metabolic acidosis that is occurring because of too much blood loss. The lactic acidosis is also part of ongoing hemorrhage, and because the body is trying to maintain the sodium inside and allowing the potassium to be lost in the urine. Therefore, the patient is becoming acidotic. Platelet activation we've already discussed. Immediately after a cut, not only the vessel tries to vasoconstrict, platelets are activated and platelet plug is formed trying to um, control the hemorrhage. Disseminated intravascular coagulation comes into play. This is what we talked of already, secondary consumption coagulopathy, secondary coagulopathy to surgical hemorrhage. When a lot of hemorrhage has taken place and the body has been spending all its coagulation factors and platelets trying to control that hemorrhage, a stage comes when the production of the clotting factors and platelets is less than the amount being lost in the hemorrhage, and therefore the optimum number of level of coagulating factors and platelets in the blood is reduced, and the blood can no longer clot. As a result, there is increased bleeding from all raw surfaces, and you cannot identify a single site, that is the whole surface of the wound or gums starts bleeding. This is due to consumption of the platelets, fibrinogen, prothrombin, and factors 5 and 8, which the body has expended all its stores to try, and now there are no more available to clot the blood. Now, depending on the amount of hemorrhage that has taken place, we can classify hemorrhagic shock or hemorrhage into class 1 hemorrhage, class 2, class 3, and class 4 hemorrhage. Class 1 hemorrhage is when the blood loss is less than 15%. In an average adult, that would mean about 750, less below 750 ml of blood. This only results in slightly increased heart rate, local swelling, or bleeding. Class 2 hemorrhage, when 15 to 30% of the blood has been lost, that would amount to around 750 to 750 ml to 1.5 liters of blood. There is increased heart rate, increased diastolic blood pressure, prolonged capillary refill. The diastolic pressure transiently is raised because of intense vasoconstriction in the peripheral arteries to try to compensate for the reduced venous flow, but this is only transient. Uh, Class 3 hemorrhages when 30 to 40% of the total blood volume of the patient has been lost. In a 70 kg adult, that would be around 1.5 to 2 liters of blood. And in class 3 hemorrhage, you have all of the above findings, plus the patient is now hypotensive, is confused, is going into acidosis, and there is decreased urine output. Then you come to class 4 hemorrhage, where the hemorrhage is more than 40% of the total blood volume. That means around more than 2 liters of blood lost without replacement. And now the hypotension is refractory to blood transfusions and IV fluids. It is refractory acidosis, not responding to your interventions. And basically, this is called irreversible shock. And ultimately the patient dies. So, whatever the cause of hemorrhage, our objective should be never to allow the patient to go into class 4 hemorrhage, and to replenish and replace all the blood loss uh, at an early stage, so that the patient does not go into irreversible shock. We will discuss further in management of hemorrhage. Now, to diagnose whether the patient has hemorrhage or not, external hemorrhage, of course, is obvious, but it is the internal hemorrhage which is deceiving. The first thing that would point to a patient having internal hemorrhage is history. History of a blunt trauma in the chest, abdomen, pelvis, to a limb with no obvious uh, blood external hemorrhage. Then the signs that you look for are rising tachycardia, hypotension, pallor, a thin thready pulse, cold extremities, and sweating, cold sweating. As I discussed earlier, rising tachycardia is the sign of ongoing hypovolemic continuous hemorrhage and internal bleeding. Now, continuing with diagnosis of hemorrhage, ultrasonography of the abdomen will reveal blood clots as white clots, irregular bodies inside the and liquid blood appears black generally inside the abdomen. In minor hemorrhages, intraperitoneal hemorrhages, you can do a diagnostic peritoneal lavage there. Um on the right or left para-umbilical region at the lateral border of the rectus muscle, you insert a wide bore needle or cannula and aspirate. If there's flank blood coming out, then that is confirmed intraperitoneal hemorrhage. Otherwise, you go ahead and do a diagnostic peritoneal lavage. You instill 1 liter of normal saline into the peritoneum and then allow it to drain out into a urine bag. And if it is contains it is frankly tainted with blood, then you know that there is an ongoing internal hemorrhage. Otherwise, you can send the sample to the lab, and they can see under the microscope for RBCs or fecal matter present in the and they can tell you whether there is blood in that saline now mixed or not. X-ray chest would reveal broadening of the mediastinum, white shadow around the heart, and that would mean mediastinal bleeding, internal mammary artery rupture, or you can have intercostal vessels rupture due to fractured ribs or a stab, and then you would have blood in the pleural space, hemothorax. Blood appears, and or any fluid white appears white on X-rays. Air appears black. Then urine output we already discussed. 0. 0.5 to 1 ml per kilogram per hour is the lowest acceptable urine output. Anything 50 to 60 ml of urine in an adult per hour. Below that, we should not accept. That means our management has not compensated for enough for the blood loss. Then central venous pressure, your teachers in medicine will explain to you. This is a sign of venous filling and venous pressure. Whenever there is hypovolemia, the central venous pressure falls, and you can confirm for a low central venous pressure by giving a fluid challenge of 200 to 500 ml colloids IV over 5 to 10 minutes, and the CVP, while the CVP is being continuously monitored, and within 5 to 10 minutes in a case of hypovolemia or low volume in the venous pool, the CVP should come up. That means that your replacement of hemorrhage is below optimum, and you need to increase your efforts. Every trauma case, you will see that there is an advice to monitor the vital signs. Blood pressure falls late, and the first sign that you look for is a rising heart rate or a pulse rate, and a falling oxygen saturation. More and more oxygen falls, hemoglobin falls, the oxygen saturation of the blood falls. So the ongoing hemorrhage, you have to keep diagnose that also. Then how do you try to identify the site of internal hemorrhage where concealed bleeding may be taking place? First, of course, is the history. Site of blunt trauma, the handle of a motorcycle striking the left hypochondrium would indicate towards a ruptured spleen. In the right hypochondrium, blunt trauma would mean laceration of the liver. Then you have to look at what the medicines the patient has been taking. If he has been taking anticoagulants or has been taking NSAIDs, there may be in gastric erosions and the patient may be bleeding inside the GIT. That would also be concealed hemorrhage until the patient develops melena or black colored stools or blood per rectum. Then in cases of cirrhosis of the liver or chronic liver disease, there will be raised portal pressure leading to esophageal varices and hemorrhoids, and the patient may be bleeding from these varices inside the stomach, and that would also be a concealed hemorrhage. So the history can give you a lot of pointers as to where to look for the site of hemorrhage. Then chest X-rays, as we discussed already, blood in the pleura, blood in the mediastinum. Then endoscopy would reveal bleeding from the gastric erosions or the esophageal varices. Abdominal ultrasound already discussed. Blood free fluid in the peritoneum or blood clots in the peritoneum. Diagnostic peritoneal lavage would also give you an idea that there is intraperitoneal hemorrhage. Then CT scan and MRI scan remain the gold standard for liver laceration, splenic laceration, or which may be partial or complete, which may be actively bleeding or may have stopped. So these are the aids that guide how to identify the site of hemorrhage. Then in management of hemorrhage, there is immediate resuscitation or first aid. First and foremost is to protect the patient from further injury. If the patient was in a building collapse, you have to take the patient away from the site, or if the patient was in a roadside accident, you have to remove the patient from the middle of the road and take him to the site so that the patient does not sustain any further injuries. Next step is to check that the patient's jawbone is not fractured, there is no foreign body in the mouth or nose, so that there is no problem with the breathing of the patient. Uh, the patient can survive an ongoing hemorrhage for some time depending on the rate of loss, but the patient cannot survive more than a few minutes if he cannot breathe or is choking on foreign material or his own teeth or the bone fragments in his pharynx. So, then the next step is to put a big cotton pad on the wound and tie a compression dressing around it to decrease the rate of blood loss. A large bore IV access IV cannula is placed 14 to 16 G, which can be used for rapid fluid replacement or blood transfusion. Then you have to take a blood sample for cross matching and send it to the lab immediately once you realize that the trauma is massive or the hemorrhage is massive, because you are going to need blood, and cross matching of blood takes at least an hour. Uh, then oxygen is administered and the patient is warmed up, wrapped up in blankets, because due to peripheral vasoconstriction, and the patient trying to conserve the blood loss and conserve the heat, the patient is feeling cold. The objective of identifying the site of hemorrhage is to decide about the steps required for hemorrhage control. For example, you can opt to operate on the patient, open up the abdomen, stop the bleeding from the spleen or the liver or from the tone mesentery of the gut, or a torn blood vessel. And similarly, endoscopy for esophageal varices and arterial embolization of the bleeding blood vessel for mesenteric tears or partial tears in the spleen. So you have to decide what to do to the patient. That is why it is important to know what options you have. That is why you want to identify where the patient is bleeding from. Then simple methods approach to control of surgical hemorrhage would be basic principles we will discuss. Tourniquet is a tight rope or a band or a strap wrapped tightly around an extremity. Uh, Tourniquets are only applied at a single bone area like the humerus and the femur, humerus in the arm and femur in the thigh, because where there are two bones like forearm and the tibial area, you cannot compress the blood vessels on the interosseous membrane, anterior posterior interosseous arteries, and therefore the tourniquet becomes ineffective. Therefore, even if the trauma is in the forearm or the tibial area, you have to tie the tourniquet proximally on the femur or on the humerus, and then it has to be tighter than the patient's systolic blood pressure. Only then the bleeding from the wound will stop. Pressure dressing, we've already discussed. A large cotton pad on the bleeding site or a rolled up towel and then a tight dressing around it. Packing is like in liver laceration, you pack in abdominal sponges into the liver, leave them in for 2 days, then on third post-op day you go in again and remove those packs gently, and by that time the blood has clotted and the bleeding has stopped. In case of superficial cuts on a limb involving only the superficial veins, like in on the wrist in suicide attempts or superficial cuts on the dorsum of the hand, simply applying a pressure dressing and raising the limb would, because there's very little blood pressure in the venous channels. So simple elevation will reduce that pressure to the level where bleeding stops. Adenal soaks in usually used in the ear, nose, and throat and dental surgeries. Uh, Capillary ooze generally responds to this in the nose, bleeding from the nose and from the tonsillar fossa and from a dental socket after tooth extraction. So, because adrenaline is a very potent vasoconstrictor and very small arterioles and capillaries can be constricted enough, then pressure can be applied and bleeding can be controlled. For larger blood vessels, you have to apply artery forceps um, to stop the bleeding, then clean the area, apply clips or coagulate the vessel. Less than 1 mm vessels are easily coagulated. For more than 1 mm blood vessels, you need either energy devices, special energy devices, or you have to ligate them. Ligation is simply tying a thread around a blood vessel. Then you can use suture materials to transfix. Transfix is passing the needle through the bleeding tissue and then tying the thread around it. Or you can underrun a blood vessel, simply pass a needle under a obvious bleeding vessel and taking some tissue with it and tie the suture around it. In case of scalp, it is very difficult to apply enough pressure on the scalp to stop the bleeding. Um, so, because of very active anastomosis of our blood vessels in the scalp, and the scalp wounds bleed from both sides. And simply taking an LS forceps and grabbing hold of the wound edges and folding the skin on itself outside, that is called eversion of the skin, would then constrict the blood vessels and stop the bleeding while you prepare for coagulation and suturing of that wound. Other specialized methods of hemorrhage control include arterial embolization and sclerotherapy. For esophageal varices, you can inject sclerosant into the bunch of dilated veins and sclerose them to stop the bleeding. Embolization is you can use small beads to intra-arterially reach the bleeding blood vessel and then release those beads to which pile up on each other like large platelets and block that bleeding vessel to stop the hemorrhage. In places where there's generalized oozing from a raw area, you can use crushed muscle, apply that, which crushed muscle releases thrombokinase. Apply that and then apply pressure dressing, and that helps in clotting on the large raw area. Similarly, gelatin sponges can be packed into, for example, we use Spongestan or Surgicel in gallbladder fossa after removing the gallbladder to stop oozing from the generalized small capillary ooze in the gallbladder fossa. Fibrin glue can be used for the same purpose. Bone wax is used to apply on the bone, raw surface of the bone which is bleeding actively. This is the only way, because sometimes, for example, in a fracture, bleeding fracture of the pelvis or the jaw, you cannot apply pressure, and you have to, in open bones, you have to apply bone wax to the bleeding end of the bone. That is the only way that the intraosseous blood vessels are blocked and bleeding can be controlled. Then sometimes you even have to resort to excision of an organ, like you can remove the spleen partially or totally. You can do a partial hepatectomy, remove certain lobes of the liver which are totally crushed or torn. You can even resort to partial or total nephrectomy, remove a kidney or part of a kidney which is totally crushed and you cannot control bleeding. So sometimes you have to actually remove an organ or part of an organ, but you have to make sure then that it is compatible with survivability. Uh, then we come to correction of coagulopathy. We have already discussed in the last lecture regarding the blood products that in case of coagulopathy, the coagulopathy, as I already discussed, can be primary due to a coagulation disorder pre-existing in the patient before a trauma, or it can be secondary to consumption of all the clotting factors in the body due to ongoing massive hemorrhage. So, platelet concentrates, um, if the platelet count goes below 50,000, you have to start contemplating thrombocytopenia. In no active bleeding, in a case of dengue fever, you may even go down to 10,000 before you decide to give platelet concentrate. But in case of trauma, you cannot afford to go below 50,000. Fresh frozen plasma, as we already know, is stored at minus 40 to minus 50 degrees centigrade, 2 years half life, shelf life, and it is rich in coagulation factors. And it is the first line therapy in coagulation disorder hemorrhage, even in massive surgical hemorrhage. In addition to the crystalloids, colloids, and the blood we are transfusing, we all anticipate the disseminated intravascular coagulation and try to preempt and prevent it by transfusing massive quantities of fresh frozen plasma periodically in the patient while the hemorrhage is being controlled. Then cryoprecipitate, when you think factor 8 and fibrinogen have been are low. Fibrinogen is indicated in fibrinogen depletion, for example, in DIC, prothrombin complex concentrate, same indication. Factor 8 for hemophiliacs and factor 9 for Christmas disease. These are specific clotting factors which are missing in the patient in primary coagulopathies, and without replacing them, it becomes very difficult to control any hemorrhage. A brief revision of other methods of managing hemorrhage: intravenous fluids. You always begin with crystalloids. These are easily available in the field and in the ER, in the ambulances. They are low molecular weight particles. They are transiently very helpful. However, they are excreted rapidly within 2 to 4 hours after being given. But in that 2 to 4 hours is the period that you might have utilized to surgically control the hemorrhage, and then you replace the blood loss with blood. Normal saline, Ringer lactate, and Hartmann solution are the usual choices of intravenous fluids, crystalloids. Then you can also use colloids where you think that the loss has been massive and you want to retain the replenishment, buy more time for controlling the hemorrhage. As we know, these are more expensive as well as more expensive. Side effects, there are greater side effects. They are high molecular weight. Uh, Usually, it is preferable, if possible, to take a blood cross match sample before you start giving a colloid infusion, because some colloid infusions can interfere with your cross matching of donor and recipient blood. Um, Generally, the colloids give more than 1.3 times the volume benefit as compared to crystalloids. Human albumin 4.5%, dextrans, dextran 40, dextran 70, starches, gelatins, etc. are the colloids that are used. We discussed all these in the last lecture. Then in management of hemorrhage, ideal replacement of blood, of course, is blood. But while the blood is being wasted, you don't want to waste your recipient blood, donor blood, if the recipient is still bleeding, unless you are forced to do massive blood transfusions because the patient is bleeding too rapidly. In that case, you do try to resuscitate the patient with giving massive number of blood transfusions. Otherwise, generally, you start with crystalloids or colloids, and once the bleeding has stopped or controlled, then you go for replacing it with blood. Uh, Rate of blood loss is critically important. For example, a hemoglobin level of 8 or more than 8 grams per deciliter in chronic blood loss, for example, dysfunctional uterine bleeding or GI bleeding or hemorrhoids. Uh, there is no indication for transfusion of blood. You can just give iron supplements and whether IV or oral if there is no major surgery planned. So, in this patient, even a hemoglobin of 8 would be acceptable where there is chronic loss. However, in a patient with acute loss, rapid blood loss, uh, even a hemoglobin of 10 would mean that you want to start with blood transfusion. The reason is that in chronic loss, the patient's body has had to time to it has had enough opportunity to uh, start and activate all the physiological responses of the body to compensate for this continuous blood loss. Whereas in acute blood loss, the physiological response of the body is lagging behind the active blood loss, and because too much blood is being lost over a short period of time, therefore, even at a higher level, transfusion is indicated. Hope you learned something in this lecture, and thank you very much. This we come to the conclusion of the 12th online lecture for our undergraduate BDS students in general surgery. See you with your next lecture next week.